You're in for a real treat. I'm proud to introduce our CEO Roundtable, moderated by Bob Beauprez.
Personally, I like the university. They gave us money and facilities. We didn't have to produce anything. You've never been out of college. You don't know what it's like out there. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results.
Thank you very much. We hope the next hour and 15 minutes is enjoyable for you. I think it will be. As moderator, I only wish I had an hour and 15 minutes with each one of these people that's here. You have a very, very distinguished panel. Let me first of all introduce Peter Coors. Pete is chairman of Miller Coors, vice chairman of Molson Coors. He's a Colorado native. We like that. And in fact, I think probably the most recognizable, iconic Colorado native we probably have in Colorado right now. The Coors name has become synonymous with Colorado, and Pete, I thank you and the family for that. Coors Brewing, in fact, is a tradition that stretches over 5 generations of the family now, started by Pete's great-grandfather, Adolph Coors, in 1873. It's a pretty amazing legacy. In addition to his corporate responsibilities, Pete has leadership positions in the Energy Corporation of America, American Enterprise Institute, the Denver Council of Boy Scouts of America, National Western Stock Show, the International Chapter of Young Presidents Organization, the Denver Art Museum, Ducks Unlimited, and is president of the Adolph Coors Foundation. I want to pause for just a minute and mention one other great thing about Pete and that family is the tremendous amount of philanthropy and support that they give to our state, our nation, and certainly to the American culture. I think it's pretty much unmatched. Pete's far too humble to mention the volumes of awards and recognitions that he personally and the family and company have received over the years, but I'll mention one that I thought was particularly appropriate, and that's when in 2010 he was named by the National Western Stock Show a Citizen of the West. So Pete Coors, thank you very much for being with us today. Our second panelist is Paul Dietzel. Paul Dietzel is an entrepreneur extraordinaire. Just 3 years ago, he founded a company called Antidote. Antidote is a technology company headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge, right? And he was also a 2014 candidate for the Louisiana congressional seat in Louisiana District 6. Antidote today, 3 years later, is the leading software platform for campaigns in the U.S. He tells me that more members of Congress from both parties use Antidote than any other software system for online contributions. They give political campaigns, religious organizations, and nonprofits the ability to securely collect online donations and manage donors. They have collected already, now in just 3 years, they have collected donations in all 50 states and from 23 different foreign nations. Pretty amazing record. If his name seems familiar to you somehow, it's with good reason. His grandfather was the legendary Coach Paul Dietzel of the 1959 National Championship team at LSU, Coach of the Year, later coached at West Point and the University of South Carolina as well. So welcome, Paul Dietzel. My good friend Heidi Ganahl has a very unique story, as entrepreneurs and CEOs often do. She's the founder and CEO of Camp Bow Wow, the largest pet care franchise in all of North America. Heidi's wasn't an easy path to success. She lost her first husband in a tragic plane crash when he was just 25 years old, in fact, on his 25th birthday. Close to being out of money and out of hope, not too many years after that, Heidi opened her very first franchise facility in 2000 in Denver. She now has over 200 franchises Camp Bow Wow is now one of the largest women-led franchises in all the country, one of the largest and fastest growing brands in the pet care industry, and a $100 million leader in that pet care sector. She was recently recognized as one of the 10 most promising entrepreneurs at the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit. In her spare time, she's a director of the University of Colorado Foundation. Colorado Succeeds, and is an advisory on the advisory board for the leadership program of the Rockies. She also founded something unique, a nonprofit that she calls Moms Fight Back, a nonprofit to help empower moms to make social change and become important players in Colorado. She ought to know of what she speaks. She's a mom of 4 children herself. Welcome, Heidi Ganahl.
Thank you.
Jim Nieman is the Vice President and CEO of Nieman Enterprises. It's a third-generation forest products company founded in 1936 by Jim's grandfather. With 2 facilities in South Dakota, 1 in Wyoming, and now 1 in our own Montrose, Colorado, the Nieman family is also in the ranching business, and owns the golf club at Devil's Tower in Hewlett, Wyoming, and Heartland Wood Pellets in Spearfish, South Dakota. Jim's son Marcus is the 4th generation of Niemans to work in the company, so congratulations to yet another family-owned business. Jim and the Nieman family have been recognized by the Small Business Administration as Small Business Person of the Year, by the Better Business Bureau with their Torch Award for Business Ethics, the United States Forest Service for their Stewardship Award, the Economic Council of Colorado as the Company of the Year. His leadership positions, both past and present, on the Wyoming Occupational Health and Safety Commission, the Wyoming Economic Development and Stabilization Board, Independent Forest Products Association, President of the University of Wyoming Board of Trustees, Chairman of the University of Wyoming School of Environmental Natural Resources, on and on and on. And last but certainly not least, Jim is also on the Economic Advisory Board for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you would agree you have an exceptional panel here today. I'm going to invite each of our 4 panelists to make a brief opening remarks about the state of affairs of the economy, their company, whatever they think is very important to share with you today, and then we'll get right into some questions. Pete, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Bob, for that very elaborate and necessary introduction. Bob, when we prepped for this, he said, why don't you guys say something about yourselves in his introduction? I said, well, I can save a lot of time because he already did it. The one thing he left out was I had the privilege of being a candidate for the United States Senate in 2004, and many of you were helpful in that, which I appreciate very, very much. So we have something in common up here. We all lost our last elections, unfortunately. I think we'll get into some of the details about the business as we go through the day. So I'll pass on to Paul.
Thank you, Pete. Perfect. Well, thank you also, and it's humbling to be up here on the stage with such great business leaders, and I look to them to see what I can become throughout the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years of my life. Looking out in the business environment, the climate in our country, it's really fascinating to me. I mean, even just 3 years ago, even 5 years ago, it was easier than it is today to start businesses. You look at the amount of pages in the tax code. You look at the amount of regulations that makes it harder for entrepreneurs to jump in and just create a business. You look at every day that the government is picking on businesses. I mean, you see with an example of Uber recently. And I think one of the things that we have to do is really unlock our innovators and unlock the next generation. We've got to get the next generation of leaders and innovators activated and involved and engaged. And that's why I'm excited to see so many millennials actually speaking at this. Guy Benson and Charlie Kirk and a handful of others. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to the panel. Thank you.
Well, I know a lot of you in this room, and I think most of you that know me know how passionate I am about entrepreneurship and innovation, and how I believe that's the key to unlocking the potential in our country. And Paul said it very well, that our youth need to be encouraged to start their own businesses and excited about it. And I spend a lot of time talking to college and high school kids about the beauty of starting your own business and how nowadays they can do it with the click of a mouse or on their phone sitting at home instead of watching TV or doing something. But I think it's unfortunate that the business environment is not very good for starting your own business anymore. It's a lot different than when I started Camp Bow Wow 16 years ago. Government overreach, taxes, it's so complicated to start a business these days. My husband, Jason, who a lot of you know from LPR, is starting a new barbecue restaurant. And just starting a single unit restaurant in Westminster has been mind-numbing to watch all the things he's had to go through, and very reminiscent of when we started Camp Bow Wow, but it's far worse now. So that's my passion. And my other passion is moms and kids and keeping our country great for our kids, which is why I started Moms Fight Back. And I really want to encourage moms in Colorado to get involved and raise their hand and be the change they want to see in politics and in the world. And I think we can really lift them up and give them a voice. And I think they're the swing vote in Colorado. So let's see how that goes.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Heidi. Jim?
Bob, Jennifer, the whole group here, what an honor to be part of this group. It's a humbling honor and blessed to be part of it. Thanks for the great introduction, so I can skip part of my talk here. But I want to go back one step that was missed here. My granddad was a corn farmer during the Great Depression in Eads, Colorado, and had to sell out. And my granddad then left and went north to find a new business and started making grain doors for the railroad business, and that's how he got started in '36. So I jumped to my children. Well, my dad was 6 years old then. Now he is 85. We've got him to halftime. In his view, that's 12 hours a day. He's still working 6-7 days a week and running 700 head of cattle. Proud of my children. My daughter's working for an organization in Dallas, Halftime Institute, that some of you might know about, with some of the objectives that you have here. My son just got deployed. He's heading overseas here pretty soon. So.
God bless him and you.
What the blessing I've been given, when I started, we had 15 employees, and now we have 480 and 350 independent contractors that are loyal to us on top of our employee base. So I've been on quite a ride here. Our company is 80% dependent on the Forest Service, but we look uniquely at the Forest Service as our partner. They're our business partner, but their hands are tied. We've strapped the Forest Service with regulation after regulation. Endangered species is another issue that it drives me nuts to see that we will protect millions and millions of acres for one species at the expense of many other species. And how about us humans? Particularly in our industry, most of our sawmills are in small communities, and that is the lifeblood for agriculture and the timber industry in those small communities, and they can be destroyed. And when our business is destroyed, it can destroy a whole community. Just a quick note, our forests are clearly overstocked. They're not healthy right now. That's why we have a bug epidemic. There's a lot of other reasons people look to, but and then with those dead trees, the fires. So my next challenge that strikes me currently is the exchange rate. The exchange rate, the currency exchange rate between us and Canada. Canada has gained close to 30 or 30 cents on the dollar in the last 18 months. And guess what? Lumber prices have toppled 25 to 30% in that direct relationship with imports from Canada, where they were formerly sent to China. I believe in free trade, but I believe in fair trade. It can't be a one-way street like this government thinks it should be to set example. Third biggest issue I have is getting a good quality education for our kids, for our employees, trying to find good educators and students to come to work for us has been a real tough challenge. And on top of that, to find those students that want to move to a small community is really a challenge. We're short foresters, we're short management, and we're short really good electricians and high tech. We have computers that cut around the curve of a tree. So almost all of our equipment is very high tech and hurt. I was on the board of trustees, and I constantly for 12 years tried to talk and influence the university to say, this generation is the smartest generation ever, but this education system wants to tilt them in a certain direction. If we teach these kids a balanced education, they're smart enough to figure out which side to go. Just give them both sides of the view, and they'll come along. So I have confidence they'll come up with the right decision. So to end, this represents Wyoming. This represents the University of Wyoming. This is Steamboat. The institute here, which is Steamboat, I'd love to see this represented down here. I don't know if there's any issues with that, but I'm so proud to be part of the Steamboat Institute and speak to you. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Well, you've all opened the door. I wanted to address the entrepreneurial part of our economy. It's always been so important to us. I want to talk about the tax code and about regulation, and I'm sure we're going to have a number of other questions as well from our audience, and I've certainly got a few in my own head. Pete, let me start with you first. You all, you and Jim come from more long-term family companies. Heidi and Paul are more recent entrepreneurs and entered into the business fray, but I know you've all got an opinion. Entrepreneurship, again, that key to the American dream that so many of us cherish and have experienced. Many think that it is threatened right now. Tell me, just a yes or a no, do you think entrepreneurship, the opportunity to enter into the business world, start your own business, live that American dream, is it getting easier or more difficult than it historically has been in America? And whether your answer is yes or no, tell me briefly why you came to that answer. What are the reasons? Pete, you want to go first?
Well, I guess a combination of yes and no. It depends a little bit. How many of this room are my competitors in? No, I mean, I'm serious. We got one I know, James, Pete, craft brewers out there. There are 2 or 3 of them in Steamboat. There's 4,000 around the country. This has blossomed just in the last 10 or 15 years from nothing to relative ease of entry into the marketplace. If I have a gripe about it, it's that they're not held to the same standards that we are. But I think from that perspective, clearly there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to get into our kind of business. They'll start to learn soon enough as they get bigger that they have more and more challenges, and the regulatory reach of not only the feds but the state and local governments will impact them. I did one quick story of maybe 2 that we have a retailer in Boulder, Colorado that bagged ice for his customers for a long time. He got a letter from the local health department that he had to have a food license, handling license, in order to bag ice. And so he called him up and he said, well, what does that entail? He says, well, there's a 22-page application and $400 fee, renewable every year. And he says, I used to have 13 employees, now I have 7. Probably have to let another one go if I do this. And he says, by the way, who reads these things? Oh, we've got people who file them. They're just building their bureaucracy. So even at the local level, this creep of bureaucracy is making it more and more difficult for small businesses. So I guess there's a combination, Bob, of opportunity and real challenge to succeed as entrepreneurs.
A mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag.
Paul?
I think the greatest challenge, at least from a technology standpoint, is that the government does not understand innovation. The government doesn't understand jobs. Because why? The government doesn't innovate, and the government doesn't create jobs. The government doesn't have any of its own money to create jobs. It's our money. And I think the government spends more time trying to figure out how to regulate innovators and regulate companies as they grow and as they succeed, as Pete was saying. And they spend less time figuring out how to open the door and create more opportunity for new companies. I think Pete would agree that, it's all right to open the door and create more opportunity for more entrants and more competitors, but don't also out of the other side of your mouth then come and make it harder once you do succeed. And once you are becoming the American dream, because then it's like, well, would I rather, go out and try to succeed, or would I rather just, punch the clock, fit in, not be out of the ordinary, not try to innovate, not ruffle any feathers, or even worse, would I rather stay at home and just punch the remote?
Heidi, you're certainly an entrepreneur. Tell us what you've been through.
Well, it goes back to my earlier comment about how easy it could be to start a business with the click of a phone. But after I said that, I was like, but yeah, then they have to go through all the red tape of registering and getting the approval and the trademark office and all the crazy stuff that happens around starting a business. So it could be so simple and easy to get so many more people into owning their own business and flourishing. And they can do that very, very easily with the technology that's out there. But then you hit that wall of government overreach to the point where you guys, I don't know if you know this, but in Colorado, the Department of Agriculture tells us at Camp Bow Wow how many people we have to have in the dog play yards to monitor the dogs, and we have to meet a ratio of 1 to 15. That's almost as strict as childcare. And what that did is, for the couple hundred other franchises around the country that can do 1 to 25, which we know our stuff, we know that keeps the dogs safe, and it makes us enough money to be sustaining our business, it cuts profitability by 10 points for our Colorado franchisees. So that's a lot fewer franchisees that are willing to enter the business if they're going to make 10% less net profit on their business because of a regulation. And I've sat with the head of the Department of Agriculture and said, how'd you come up with this rule? Because we have more camps than anybody around the country. She said, we just have a feeling. And I said, what do you mean you have a feeling? We think that's what's going to keep the dogs safe. And I said, well, I'll show you all this data to prove you wrong, or to prove that we can do it at 1 to 25. She goes, that's not your job, darling. You just go run your business, and we'll tell you how to operate it. And I will remember that conversation for as long as I live.
I expect you will. Pete touched on it. Local regulation, state regulation, federal regulation. In your business, Heidi, which is more onerous, or are they all three a problem?
We're getting it from all angles right now. I don't know if you guys saw yesterday the ruling that came out from the National Labor Relations Board. It is going to fundamentally change franchising in this country. McDonald's, they're going after McDonald's first, but what they're trying to do is tie the franchisor, which is us at Camp Bow Wow Corporate, and we have 40 or so employees, to the franchisee, who has about 3,500 employees across the country. And they're saying that we are now responsible for those 3,500 employees. And if one person makes a bad hiring decision, often another state, all the franchisees together have to pay for that mistake. So what they're trying to do is unionize the restaurant industry because they haven't been able to do it because it's so heavy in the franchise. And they're independently owned and operated businesses. We do not control the employee at the end franchise unit. So it's a terrible day for franchising, or it was yesterday, it still is today. And we'll see how it's going to roll. But that decision was made by 5 unelected bureaucrats that Obama appointed, 3 of which, are his buds. So we'll see how that goes.
Jim, the entrepreneurial opportunities, good, bad, or as Pete pointed out, maybe a little bit of both?
Well, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'd like to get into the sawmill or forest products business today, looking back over the almost 80 years of what it took us to get here, I would first talk to him a little bit about, because I have some pride in the manufacturing side, Because when you look at the strength of this country, we are founded on the manufacturing side, because that's new money. Is it new money or old money? And it's so key. And I have a certain pride in creating new money, which turns over more times when it's passed on than old money is. So I'd try to encourage him. Now, I wouldn't do this, but if he asks, is there other opportunities? I'd tell him, hey, go to Canada. They're going to set out a square for you. They're going to give you all the timber you want. They're going to give it to you, the timber to you free, almost a very minimal cost. They're going to subsidize the labor, and they're going to give you zero interest loans and put you in business. And he says, well, don't you do it down here? No, I said, it's a different concept. But if you can do it in America, we figured out how to do that. I was trying to think of what regulations, when you're dealing with Forest Service, we don't deal with. Well, dogs and franchises, that's two of them. I couldn't think any while ago. I think we deal with about every, from, immigration to some of the ones I mentioned through the Forest Service, NEPA, ESA, it just goes on and on. We deal with it. I've got a number of people each and every day dealing with regulation, day in and day out, and even on the export side.
Paul?
So I was thinking about this, yes or no, if there is more opportunity today than there has been in the past. And actually, you know what, in thinking about it, I would say that there's probably more opportunity in America now than any other time in history, because technology has opened the door for that. The problem, the reason that is also at the exact same time not the case, is because the government has placed itself between the innovators and the opportunity.
Yeah, when my granddad got in the farming business, it was on a handshake from a neighbor that loaned him money to buy the land, and he became a farmer.
Yeah.
Became a whole lot more complicated by the time I showed up.
Just look what Dodd-Frank's done to the banking industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a little experience with that too.
Yeah.
And it's throttled financing for
absolutely
and
it
the small community banks, as you well know, are just disappearing, and that's who funds franchises
Yep. And small business.
and jobs. That's what creates
Speaking
jobs.
of, let me ask you my second question. Every politician, Democrat, Republican, wherever they come from on the political spectrum, is going to, of course, say, I'm for small business, I'm for pro-growth economic policy. And yet the burden, as you've already outlined, all four of you, the burden of government seems to keep getting heavier and heavier. And capital seems to be more difficult to access. Job creation seems to be a little bit out there. In fact, today we've got a smaller percentage of our workforce eligible population actually working or even looking for work than we've had in over a generation. Focus first on the tax code, then I want to come back and ask you specifically even more about the regulation problem. But is the tax code, well, again, politicians will profess, we want to incentivize capital investment, we want to incentivize economic growth and job creation. Is the tax code friend or foe? And thinking I might know the answer, tell me specifically what you'd like to see changed in the tax code. They talk about it in Washington every election cycle, but if you could tell Congress and the President what to do about the tax code, what would it be? Let me start with Paul this time, and then we'll come around this way.
So I think that the real answer is not whether or not Congress knows what to do. I think it's whether or not Congress will actually act on it, because they have all of these different invisible players out there that incentivize them to not act upon it. You hear about them on TV every night. They're all talking about lowering the tax rate, broadening the base, getting rid of loopholes, all these different things. I mean, you know all the words that they use on TV. They all know it, both parties, and they know that it's historically that's what works, and deregulation works. But that's what they tell us, and then they go back with all their buddies up in D.C. and they don't do anything. So I think it's not necessarily whether or not they know what to do. I think it's that they're comfortable with how it is.
What would you tell them to fix?
So I mean, specifically, I mean, there's a handful of different things. I mean, I would to simplify. I like to simplify and make things easy. As you know from using our software, we like to make things easy for people, is I would lower all the rates across the board, and then I would get rid of a handful of ones. It still baffles me, but maybe it's because I'm 29 and I don't understand such complex subjects. But the death tax just blows my mind. But maybe that's because, all of my grandparents are in their 80s and 90s, and I don't think about death as often. But I can't imagine how that works for the people. But I think
It's criminal.
it is, and I think it goes back to the previous question that each of the panelists, have mentioned, is that really at the end of the day, it's about money. It's about control. That's what it's about. It's not, they can say that they're for the middle class and they're for entrepreneurship and they're for jobs and they're for all these things. But at the end of the day, the government at all levels is about control. Yep. And how do you get control? You breed dependence on the system.
You look like you're
Yeah,
ready
I
to
want
go.
to jump into this.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Pardon me, Heidi, but going out of turn, but when I was campaigning, I had a debate with Ken Salazar about inheritance tax and death tax. And a bunch of contractors in the room, and Ken got up and he says, well, we're talking about maybe $5 million per person as an exemption. And I said, well, he says, don't you think 10,000 is enough? Yeah, $10 million exemption's enough. And he said, certainly everybody in this room would probably go along with that. And so when I got up, I said, well, how many people in this room have, between you and your wife, $10 million? And just a few hands went up. And I said, how many would like to? And I got the whole crowd. So, by getting rid of it, and I used to say that, look, if you get rid of the death taxes, one of two things is going to happen. The kids are either going to have a spree and spend it, in which case the money gets back into the marketplace, or they're going to reinvest it and build jobs and build our economy. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that's bad that can happen if we get rid of the inheritance tax.
Absolutely. Heidi, friend or foe?
Well, I love to talk about capitalism, how capitalism is not a curse word. In fact, if you look at the last 200 years of history, there are fewer people in poverty, fewer people that are hungry now all around the world, not just here in the US. There's never been more innovation than the last 200 years. Well, what happened in the last 2 years? America happened, free markets, capitalism, industry happened. And if we unlock that potential, we can't, it's not just about making money, it's about solving all the world's worst problems. If we can let loose entrepreneurs and innovation, I think that getting rid of the IRS, getting to a fair tax, I like the fair tax. And I'll tell you what, I sold Camp Bow Wow last August to, I'm still CEO for a while, but to VCA, the big veterinary chain. And so I got to experience paying that tax bill in April on the sale of the company, so 50% bye-bye. Then I'm in the 50% tax bracket now, so 50% bye-bye. And then if I die, 50% bye-bye goes to the, doesn't go to my kids and my husband. So it's what it does is, do I want to start another company right now? No. I have all these opportunities to do another company, another franchise, and I'm like, I'm going to go work on my nonprofit and try and make a change that way. It's terrible.
It is a major disincentive. Jim, I'm guessing you've experienced some of the same, including what we haven't talked about, the highest corporate tax rate in the world, of any developed nation in the world. And it does baffle me, because I've sat in the halls of Congress and heard these proclamations that we are incentivizing capital formation, business investment, those risk takers out there. Are we incentivizing them, or is the tax code holding us back?
The tax code definitely is holding us back, and we've got to find a way to simplify it, reduce it. I like Heidi's thoughts. If we could abolish the IRS, that would be good. I know that won't
My
happen,
wife's got that bumper sticker, by the way.
Does she? Okay, that's good. I spend, in my company, a few $100,000 just to accountants. It would simplify and reduce my costs there just to figure out what our taxes are. A simple tax code would be good across the country. I'm like Pete. Why are we penalizing the rich? Why is this whole country thinking about the wealthy and help the poor? Let's stop the fight and try to let the rest of us have a chance to get there, like you said about those that have 10 million. The death tax, I helped start an organization 15 years ago working on the death tax. That's double taxation, triple if you're a corporation. You've already paid at the corporate level, you paid at the personal level, now you lose your father and mother, and you pay it again. From my end, there should be no death tax. It should be abolished altogether. I don't care how wealthy you are. I know I won't get elected either if I take that tone forward, but that's my view towards the
Well,
death
the
tax.
tax code is certainly a big piece of how government regulates our every move. In fact, I've had some economists suggest to me that if we were in a position, big if, that business people were making their business decisions based on what made business sense instead of what the tax code told them to do, we'd probably immediately add about $2 trillion of economic activity, $2 million to our GDP, just in that stroke. So the simplifying or flattening or making fair the tax code makes a lot of sense. Let me move on because we're going to run out of time. I know we are. Let me move on to regulation. Now, to put it in context, by the government's own calculation, this is coming out of the Small Business Administration, the cost of regulation on an annual basis, just federal regulation, not state and local, as we've already talked about, is about $2 trillion a year. About $2 trillion. That exceeds by a factor of 8 or 10 to 1 the cost of paying all these taxes that we've already said is a big disincentive. So it baffles my mind when we've had all kinds of people in the business world like these up here, as well as major economists, that say certain pieces of legislation, that $800 billion plus stimulus package, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, on and on and on, that in the middle of a recession and an economy that's trying to come back, we impose anti-job, anti-capital investment regulation that compounds the problem. And not surprisingly, through these last about 7 years, when we're technically still in recovery, job creation and getting the economy moving again has been, I'll be polite and say it's been a little sluggish. So, if regulation is that excessive, I'd like to hear from each of you, and you've already said the regulation's a problem, some specifics. I'm going to ask a two-part question. What regulations specific in your business are most problematic? And if you were in one of those witness chairs in front of Congress and they said, Heidi, Jim, Paul, Pete, what should we do? What one or two things should we do to fix the problem? What would have a big macro effect to get the economy moving, not at 2% or so, but to get us going at that 4.5%, 5% where many people think we need to be right now? What would you tell Congress? So let me start with Heidi this time, and you get the first shot at the ball.
I have a lot to say about this, but I'll try and keep it brief. I'm a firm believer in vote with your dollar. And I think society would be such a much better place if we just left it to individuals to figure out who they wanted to support and which companies they should give their dollars to. And I think the free market would flesh out a lot of this regulatory stuff. But I think as far as if I was sitting in front of Congress and asked them to do one thing, I mean, I keep thinking, Bob, about when you were campaigning, you talking about your first day in office, sitting there and just going through all the regulations in Colorado. Nope, 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 and just, I mean, somebody's just got to wipe the slate clean, and I don't think that'll happen, but we've got to get somebody into office that's willing to take that attitude with it and trust people. Trust
Send me
people.
in, Coach.
Happily.
Jim?
I'm going to go back to one of my opening comments on NEPA and the environmental. When you do an environmental impact statement, it takes the Forest Service about 5 to 7 years to put together a timber sale, and then they're inundated. And then it takes 2 to 3 years to put the statement together. Then a single letter can stop that timber sale. So this, to me, ties back to our forest health along with the regulation. So the Forest Service's hands are tied. So guess what happens? They file a suit and they find one little bitty deal wrong, and then the government reimburses the environmental community for their fees. In some cases, $700 an hour for the legal fees. That's incriminating. So there's some bills in right now to help that regulation may be diminished and maybe untie the hands of the Forest Service, which would help us tremendously because our costs go right up with that.
In your business specifically, I think litigation has really become a weapon of the war, hasn't
Oh, it is, yeah. Yeah.
Pete?
How many rich, guilty liberals are there in the room? They must be all at the tent, Bob. I don't know. Look, this is, you get rid of regulations and all those guilty rich liberals are going to be real worried that somebody's going to get hurt. I think Dr. Carson hit it right on the head by reducing the size of government. We're generated somewhere between 30 and 60,000 pages of new regulations every year. Who writes those regulations? Little underlings that get government jobs that pay nicely and they can retire when they're 40 years old. And if we can reduce the size of government, we'll reduce the size of regulation. Eventually we can begin to repeal some of this stuff. But as long as we have regulators having the opportunity to keep writing regulations, they're going to write regulations because it's job security. Is it true it's true at the federal level, it's true at the state level, and it's true at the local level.
It absolutely is. I'm with some hesitancy, I'm going to challenge my friend Pete. It's more like 80,000 pages out of the federal government and about another 20,000 out of our state government. So 100,000 pages of rules promulgated every single year to control, as Dr. Carson said, everything we do.
And entrepreneurs cannot keep up with it.
Yep.
And Dodd-Frank is a great example. And we put community banks out of business. We haven't started a new community bank, Bob, and
I think there's been one since the recession started, I think there's been one new charter in Colorado.
and we've lost a whole ton of them
You bet.
nationwide. So it's but they haven't even written all the regulations they want to write yet.
No, the imagination is working well there in the bureaucracy. Paul, I want to ask you even maybe more specifically, since you volunteered that you're still under 30. Isn't it amazing what he's accomplished? And he hasn't had his 30th birthday yet. You are inspiring, my friend. But your generation, sometimes I see some polling data, and Pete touched on it. One that Heidi mentioned during the last campaign, I kept talking about needless regulation, job-killing regulation, and how we ought to go after them with a vengeance, and I'd like to do that. But some statistics I've seen more recently, just in the last month or so, suggest that especially among young adults, they have a very different attitude. They think that they really need government to control those nasty big corporate executives that are out there preying on them, and government somehow is going to save them from themselves. Why if that's prevalent in our younger adult age group, and I think it probably is, how'd that happen and what do we do about it? Because I think it is anti-capitalism, anti-American economy, anti-free market.
Well, I think it goes to the point of that government has done a very good job at one thing, making people dependent on it. And there was a debate over the past few years of if we should increase the age where young people could stay on their parents' plans. And what I always said, well, look, there are a few exceptions, but who in the world would rather stay on their parents' plans, stay in their parents' house until they're 26 years old, or go out and actually have a good paying job that they can go and work and they can feel good about themselves and they can afford to go out on dates and they can afford, that's a no-brainer. So I think that the reason that you see those statistics is not because that is the optimal thought of young people. I think that's because that is what government has bred. I think that, you look at Dodd-Frank. And it's also a lack of information being given to the young people. I went and spoke to a group of about 100 students at a university while I was running for Congress. And I said, how many of you have heard of Obamacare? Every single person raised their hand. I said, how many of you have a bank account, a debit card, a credit card, a student loan, or anything else like that, something in the financial sector? Everybody raised their hand. I said, how many of you have heard of Dodd-Frank? 2 people out of 100. 2 people. And we were talking about this last night over dinner. I mean, Dodd-Frank, it was a misguided 2,300-page attempt to fix corruption in the financial markets. And do we really think 2,300 pages of documents is going to fix corruption? No, all it did was make the corruption more complicated, made it harder to find. And that was what the intent was. They can say all they want, that it's all about helping we the people, and it's about helping the consumer, and it's about helping innovation and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it all goes back to control. They wanted to be able to keep their dominion up there in D.C. and keep us back here where we belong. And so I think that it's, if you look at the numbers, talking about jobs, millennials have the lowest employment right now in the history of our country.
That's right.
Which is if you look across the age brackets, it hovers around 16%. What's even more discouraging to me is that in the African American community, that number climbs to 40%. It's just completely unacceptable. And it's because, night after night we see on the news, and we see coming out of the White House, and we see coming out of, our government and the people in Congress, and not all of the people there are good people. So for anybody watching on C-SPAN, I want you to know there are good people in Congress, just not all of them are good. But we live in a society that no longer, as my grandfather's generation, as my parents' generation, no longer rewards success, no longer rewards hard work, and no longer rewards you to be loyal. What happened to the loyalty in our country, from relationships to employment? I mean, back 30 years ago, people would stay with companies for 30, 40 years, or they might leave and they might go start a company that then they go back because of the innovations they found in the company they work for that saves that company hundreds of millions of dollars. One of my business partners was actually working for a company 50 years ago, and he created this small little thing that actually saved his company hundreds of millions of dollars. And he started at the very bottom and worked his way all the way up to the very top after 40 years, and became hailed as Forbes. It was Forbes' best managed companies in America in the 90s. And that wasn't because of, he was handed it, or it wasn't certainly because of the government. It was because he worked his butt off, and he knew that his hard work would be rewarded. And today, going back to the initial question, young people don't see that hard work is rewarded. It's a sad...
It's just not fair that somebody's successful.
Right.
Well, we're touching on a subject that I'd like to ask. Do I have time to ask one more question, and then we do some audience? All right, then we're going to do that. I want to talk about that workforce and workforce readiness specifically. Jim, I'm going to open with you because you had the experience at the University of Wyoming, president of the Board of Trustees, and you mentioned, I think, in your own opening comments that education is an important issue to you. During the last campaign, I visited I visited a lot of our Colorado cities, but Colorado Springs in particular. And I was talking to an official with the Economic Development Council down there, and he pointed out a big paradox, and I don't think Colorado Springs was alone. I specifically went there because their unemployment rate at that point in time was among the highest in Colorado. I asked him how many jobs how many were unemployed. I forget the exact number, but here's what I do remember. He said, we've actually got postings, jobs available in Colorado Springs that outnumber the number of people on unemployment by 2 to 1. More jobs available than people that are unemployed. I said, that seems to be a paradox. What's the problem? He says the job skills of those unemployed don't match the skills needed for that job. So I looked at a study, Are They Ready to Work?, a collaborative workforce study, and this was an opening quote in the executive summary. The U.S., after all their findings are summarized, they said the U.S. workforce is woefully ill-prepared for the demands of today's and tomorrow's workplace. CEOs, like the 4 of you, had input into that study, and they said, yes, we need basic knowledge, the old 3 R's, we need academic skills, but they said what is more necessary in today's workforce is applied skills, professionalism, work ethic, oral and written communications, teamwork and collaboration ability, critical thinking and problem solving, Paul. So, can you find, here's the question after the pontification, can you find the workforce that you need? And if not, I know you specifically, Jim, have pondered this and worked at it. What do we need to do to fix it?
Well, first, I have such a strong passion for education, trying to help and have an influence on the education system from a business perspective. Too many times we try to force our kids onto college because that's the right thing to do, when maybe a trade school or something would be a better option for them. But I'm going to divert a little bit, if you don't mind, Bob. I want to share with the crowd an experience I had at Montrose. We took that over almost 3 years ago, September 1st, and about a third of our workforce, we've done a study, and none of them were using unemployment, none of them used the medical services, and they were all qualified. So under the Social Security Administration, they was all legal citizens. Under the Social Security Administration, we cannot look any deeper than that piece of paper that they give us. It's illegal. We'll get penalized. Up home, which I call home in Wyoming, we use Homeland Security E-Verify. So we started snooping and applied it down there instead of what the traditional company we took over. Found out 38 of the employees were illegal. So I said, wow, some have been there 14 years, some 12, some 11, some 10. Some of them had children that were graduating from high school, been in the community. We had to make the tough choice. Hired a really good legal firm out of Denver to consult us, and their specialist said, this administration hates you. They will not hurt the employees, those immigrants that are not legal. They are after us, the business guy. The fine would have been $16,500 per document. My fines would have been $900 and some $1,000. I had to let 38 people go. That's one of the toughest situations I've ever been in. It was painful to see those good workers, and they had skills. Guess what we had to do? I just spent $6 million plus automating to eliminate, which you had a chance to look at. That was my alternative because I couldn't find skilled workers to replace and fill in there. So I've had a tough situation there. So I have a passion for the hardworking ethics that come from Mexico to part of Colorado. I felt like I was going back 50 years. They have some of the passions that I seen in my dad and my granddad, the work ethic and strong faith-based family values that I had to let go. That really hurt, Bob.
It had to, and one of the many places I fault government, I think they do need to enforce the employer laws, but they also need to give you a system that is absolute, quick, accurate, that you can actually live within the law.
Yeah.
And they've not done that. I know that the system's seriously flawed.
I followed the laws,
Yep.
but this is showing
And you
20,
were still
30 years
exposed.
of broken laws.
You were still
and
exposed,
letting people come across that border
Yep.
and not having a proper system. I hope Ben can help fix that if he gets elected.
Pete, you've got an enormous workforce. I don't know how big it is, but attracting skilled workers, retaining them, how tough or easy is it?
Again, it's a mixed bag. We've got employees that have been there 30, 40 years, love the company, love everything about it. The younger employees tend to be a little bit more mobile. It's the best word I can use. You talked about going down to Colorado Springs. I talked to a banker friend in Colorado Springs a year or so ago, and he said, Pete, I'm really having a hard time keeping my cashiers. I said, well, that's interesting. It's a nice entry-level job, probably high school education required and a minimal amount of skills. You got to be able to count, use 10 fingers. But it's a good entry-level job, and you do that for a while, and maybe an opportunity arises, and you get promoted and so forth. Oh, yeah, but you understand, I'm paying them good wages, but they cannot make as much money at my wage rate as they can if they go on unemployment. And so I don't know what the actual number is, but it's well in excess of $50,000 of income. and then you got to pay taxes before you compete with being on the government dole. So when Dr. Carson was talking about the hammock and the versus the safety net, we have way too many people that are in the hammock, not because they necessarily want to, but say, what the heck? It's if they were going to offer you that money, wouldn't you take it? So the work ethic is something that's not really being developed in our young people. We're seeing this with young people as we have to replace particularly technical people, electricians, mechanics, pipe fitters. It's very difficult to get people that want to take the time and be apprentices and learn the trade and have a lifetime career. Truckers, they're offering $90,000 for truck drivers. We can't find enough over-the-road truck haulers to bring our grain and take our beer out into the marketplace. Geez, I can sit home and collect a check. Why should I be in a truck and be away from my family? And so these are the issues that really we need to deal with. And again, shrinking government, shrinking dependency on the government will go a long way towards developing the kind of talent, because it'll grow out of need. You know, my great-grandfather came here, and your grandfather, and all of our ancestors came here. There was no safety net. There was no OSHA. There was no EPA. There was no disability. There was no unemployment. There was none of this stuff. They didn't have any choice. Now there's too much choice.
So you paint, you've outlined it very well, and I find nothing to take exception with, but I'd ask a follow-up question. Can we get from here to there? Can we implement the kind of reforms you're talking about and get that job done in a political environment that we have to deal with?
People go to work out of necessity. They got to eat. And if you take away their subsistence and they're able-bodied, they ought to be able to go get a job and figure out that they better, all those jobs that are available in Colorado Springs,
You bet.
they better start learning how to do those jobs.
You bet. Paul, you're in the high-tech business, and I expect you need some fairly skilled people. Can you find them? And on a broader scale, what about the workforce in America, and especially the folks entering the workforce, your age?
Right. So a lot of it it goes back to education, right? And then also, too, talking to a point that Pete was kind of talking about is that the work ethic that was instilled in previous generations has not been intrinsically instilled in my generation. And I think that's also partially because the government got too big, and then the government thought that it could tell parents how to raise their kids. And so you're looking over your shoulder if you correct or rebuke your child, thinking that you might get thrown in jail for it or whatever. I don't have kids, I'm not married. But you know, that would be my observation on that. But with education, in terms of high-tech workforce, it's definitely a challenge to find people. There's a shortage across our country in the technology, especially in the engineering type field. And you see, that's why, I mean, every day it's bred this kind of transient shift of employees back and forth. I mean, that's why you see in the news of lawsuits between Google and Facebook and Apple and all these people, because they're just stealing employees, because that's all they can get. The only place they can get employees is from other companies. And I think that then stems back to the fact that, you know, going back to what Jim was saying, is that we're pushing, the government is pushing people to go to college, go to graduate school, in the name of equality. We're saying that everyone needs to go get the same type of degree, be the same type of person, fill in the same checkbox, do the same type of thing. But the problem with that is when they graduate and they go and try to find a job, there's only so many of that type of job. And quite frankly, there are more jobs these days that you can get without even having a college degree. I mean, most of my employees with our company, I would say, or maybe half, had no background in what we do prior to coming to work for us. We trained them. It wasn't because they're college or their university or whatever.
You look for the basic skills, and then you train them.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I think one of the things that we're looking for is hard work, work ethic, all that. And we've settled with saying we'll teach them the rest. My CTO has almost become like educator in chief. helping employees develop and grow their skills. And I mean, I think you see that across all industries. I don't think that there's a job shortage. I think that there's a worker shortage, but I don't think there's a people shortage, if that makes sense.
We could spend a lot of time on this. Heidi, I hate to use the word briefly, but if you can address this briefly, and then we'll get to some audience questions.
Well, I think the key is education reform and private and public partnerships in the education system, like IBM is doing with St. Vrain School District, the P-TECH program, things like that, where you get employers telling the education system what skills they need and offering apprenticeships and internships. I'll end on, I think it's Switzerland or Sweden, one of them has a graduation rate of 97.4%. That's because at their sophomore year, beginning of their sophomore year, they are partnered with a company and start an apprenticeship program. So they graduate with wonderful skills and great jobs, and they love what they do, and they're passionate about it. So,
Excellent point. I think we've got a resurgence of what they're calling now career technical education. Back in my day, we called it VOTEC.
yeah.
But actually teaching job-ready skills to vast numbers of young people that maybe they can, after they get that degree in hand, that paper. then
Bob,
they-
you got a
then
really good
go to work.
example. The Arupe Jesuit School
Yes, it's marvelous.
is
marvelous.
marvelous. If you get a chance, people, take a look at the
North-
success
North
rate
Den-
coming
North
out of
Denver.
there. It is unbelievable, all private funded.
Yeah, and one day a week, they're doing just what Heidi talked about.
have
One
to.
day a week, they're actually at a job site doing real work.
And they get to pick who they want to work
Yeah.
with, so they get
Beautiful
to pick their
thing.
passion.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Education, like Heidi was saying, I mean, education really is like technology in many ways. I always say that in the technology industry, if you don't innovate, you get left behind, right? Education has become the exact same way. We're educating the future for the 1960s. We've got to start educating the future for the future.
Very well said. Very well said. All right. We've got a microphone over here, and Gary's got one over there. So, who's?
Here we go.
Kevin's got a question. Kevin, you got a big enough booming voice. Just let her rip. All right.
I want C-SPAN to hear this. No, I'm kidding.
Not
All
your
12
first
people.
rodeo, is it, Kevin?
I'm kidding. I got a kind of a loaded question for you. First of all, I think education in America sucks. I think that it's a racket by the government to get people to go, they keep raising the rates and you put scholarship money in it and it's become a farce. But here's my comment and kind of a question. I believe that a lot of the, quote, affirmative action and the diversity programs that are being regulated, essentially forced on businesses, is what's ruining your businesses. And you talked about bringing people into the forestry thing. There are people that, I'll just say it, black people, we don't want to come to little towns and be foresters, okay? But the government, if you hire too many white folks that do, then the government comes in and goes, where are the black people, right? So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So, pardon my French, kiddos. But
All right,
so,
I understand all of it.
so here's my question. You've got companies like the retailers, J.C. Penney's and what have you, that have been forced to hire 3-foot tall Guatemalan women because they fit some profile, and they're all in triage, going out of business. And then you've got places like Google and maybe some of the high-tech people you're talking about that they say, hey, we'll hire anybody, which I think is the American way. Let's bring the best, and you bring me the best, I'll hire them. I don't care if they're 8-foot purple, from Somalia. If they can code, I want them. So my question to you guys is, from an HR perspective, do you feel like I feel that government social engineering of business is really what is the downfall of business? Because when America says, bring us your best and brightest, that's what we want. They don't care about what your religion or creed or color or whatever is. Bring us your best and brightest. So do you feel that way? And I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to answer it on public TV.
Who wants a shot at that?
Okay.
Jim.
Boy, what a great question, and I want to cheer you on for. I have documents at each of my sawmills about this thick. I have to monitor every month. Thank God, my head of my construction division, his daughter married somebody from Louisiana. I'm a town of 400, And you have to monitor what percentage in your area. And that one person got us up to speed to be in compliance. Otherwise, I would have been fined. And he's still with us, and a great person and a great worker. And he's about 4.5 foot tall, too.
You've got some experience with this, I expect.
I agree with you. Our K-12 educational system is really in trouble, and it's shameful. It's really shameful, and we're trying to deal with this in Colorado and Jefferson County now, and I've got a recall election because they're doing things right, and the teachers union doesn't like that. And I'm going to pick on teachers unions, but teachers unions all about the union and not at all about the kids. And so I think there's places and reasons to have unions, but our kids need to get educated, and they need to be educated well. And when Colorado Succeeds is a great organization that's working on rating schools, and I have a executive assistant whose sister's daughter goes to a school that has a D rating. And when she asked him, she found out that it was a D rating. She said, well, why do you want your daughter to go to this school? She can go to a B-rated school that's next door. So, oh, we love the teacher. So parents have got to get on top of this, which is a huge piece of the problem, those who have parents that care. But, I don't think minority hiring and all this stuff is been the cause of any real significant issues. In fact, I think it's helped us. Our problem is at higher management levels is finding that we like diversity. The problem is getting young people who are willing to work to start. And when I give talks to employees, I said, look, you got to start somewhere. Everybody wants to be president. Well, you got to start. When I talk to college kids, they said, well, I got this fancy education. I said, well, why don't you go be an apprentice? Why don't you go drive a truck for a while and learn the business? And pretty soon you'll be the supervisor. And if you're a good supervisor, you'll be the manager, and then you'll be the depot guy, and then that's how the system works. Young people want instant gratification, and we've taught them that, and they get it on their iPhones with Facebook, and it's like a candy store, and they don't understand. You got to start somewhere, and that to me is the key. And I don't care what your race, religion, or anything else is. You got to get started.
Can we get one more question in? Where?
Jack,
There we are.
Jack has a question.
Hey, there may be, so I say that we pay, thank you. We pay a lot of taxes for the public schools. And of course, I used to go to public schools. So I say that we pay money for a terrible purpose. Number one, the teachers don't really, like almost every lesson that I ever had in the public schools was a review lesson from probably kindergarten. Number two, the kids were just, the teachers never really cared what anyone did, so it was just, and we're paying money so that they can get paid for doing absolutely nothing helpful in a kid's education. So I just, what can we do to fix that?
I'll jump in on that.
And how can we do that? How?
What was your name? What's your name again?
Well,
Jack?
well, one of the things we'll do to fix that is the next time we put a panel like this together, Jack, you'll be up here.
I'll trade spots with you. Jack,
Paul,
thank you
Paul
for the
has
question.
your answer.
Thank you for the question. So I think, let me just do a poll really quick in the room. How many people in here were prepared for the job force by the Department of Education? Okay, seeing there are none, we'll move on.
They're in the tent.
Yeah, are they anybody in the tent or around the world? No, they're not, because the Department of Education doesn't educate people. Over the past 20 years, you've seen an increase in the amount of administrators in schools across all levels that has doubled. It's double the rate of teachers and researchers, which has increased at a higher rate than students. So what's happening is we're increasing all the bureaucrats, and that's raising our cost. And the quality of education is going down while the costs are going up. So you're basically crippling the young people with these rising amounts of debt for less quality. In no other world would that work except for education, because the government has so deeply rooted its hands into our education system. And I mean, so that's, I think, one of the first things that we've got to do is get rid of the Department of Education. I know a lot of us, yeah, I feel like we could each take a department and just get rid of it. But so to talk about the money side of it, because talking about taxes, so the Department of Education, the education in America is not underfunded. It's not. $600 billion annually, and I don't know the exact number, so I know somebody will probably hit me on Twitter about that. Somewhere around $600 billion a year is spent on education in America. And you think about that, we pay all these taxes. And why do we pay all these taxes? Because the government's doing way more than it was ever intended to do. So I think the biggest thing is to shrink the size of government. And by the way, I'm not advocating for the government to give us $600 billion to control the education system. But I do think we'd probably run it better than the federal government. But anyway, so I think it's all about shrinking the government. It's about reducing the waste, reducing the bureaucrats, and getting back to actually rewarding educators. Because the more you increase the cost of the administrators and the bureaucrats and all these people, you're also having less money to pay the actual people that are educating our kids. And if you have less money to pay the people that are educating our kids, then the next generation, as Pete was saying, is going to say, well, I can go get a job better doing something else, or I can just sit home. So they're not going to go be educators. And I say that because my mom was a teacher. She taught in the public school system for many, many years. And the education system that we had prior to the Department of Education, which wasn't all that long ago, was so much better than whenever the Department of Education came in and said, oh, listen, you guys have got it wrong. We need to take care of it. So anyway, so I think to directly answer your question, we've got to continue the discussion and continue electing people that will reduce the size of government. Because the more that we increase government, the further the quality of education is going to go down.
I want to just answer Jack on one thing. Obviously, Jack, you have an unbelievable set of parents to help get you where you're at. But that's partly what's missing in America today. I want to put, I have real issues with the education system, but we have lost the family value, and so many kids are raised by a single parent. That person doesn't have the time or effort to help that kid. The American family household has to get back together and figure out and raise those standards themselves, and they go in and help prop the standards of those teachers back up like what used to happen when I was a kid. So thank your parents for me and what they do. I want to give them a hand.
We have time for one more, Jennifer?
I'm told that we have time for one more question.
There we go.
And it's really a statement.
I couldn't find the face.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Okay.
now we can.
It's really a statement. And as an entrepreneur, I feel all the pain that you feel. I've had the exact same experience. But there is hope, because from Central Illinois, we started a little class. 40 business people went together to pay for it. That was 8 years ago. And we take high school seniors, and each child has to start a real business. And the things that come out of that class are amazing. An example would be, if I make any money, I'm going to give it all away, because they think it's evil if you make a lot of money. But that class has grown. We are now in 4 states. It takes about a year to put the class together to start it. We are now going to be in 45 communities. And I'm hopeful, after a meeting yesterday, we're going to have one in Steamboat. This will be our first one in Colorado. And it's transformational what those kids are learning. They understand what it takes to start a business. And a 17-year-old said to me, well, I don't have to pay taxes. I'm only 17. So they don't have a clue. But there's hope, Mr. Nieman. I identified with everything you said. Education is everything. Thank you.
Panelists, thank you very much. This was better than I even expected, and I had high expectations. This is awesome. Yeah, yeah. Thank your panel. Thank you very much.